Okay. All right. I believe my screen is shared. Happy Friday. For those who are watching this on the recording, thanks for watching. Today's topic kind of outside the box, outside the normal functional medicine topics, but nonetheless very important. So I'm excited to kind of talk about this. Is a very personal topic. Obviously, it sounds like it's specifically for men here, but the um, what I want to kind of definitely portray here is that the health of men in our world directly affects everybody. And so hopefully that'll kind of become clear as we work through this protocol. And again, very personal topic. This has been a journey of mine that probably started several years ago, 3, 4 years ago, just this awareness of some things that needed to be uprooted and changed. There were internal patterns, ways of looking at the world, ways of relating with people, myself. And so uh, this is designed for men, and the term inner work uh, is more of kind of a soul work. When I say men's work here, this is a deep inner work. And then in my intro here, I just kind of make, and I'll upload this, and please share this if this is something that would be helpful for a friend, a spouse, a son, um, a father, even. And so this doesn't, age is kind of not necessarily important here. This is across the board a topic, but most men in their 30s, 40s, 50s, sometimes later in life, um, start to realize that there's a need to do this inner work and uproot some things. And so I'm always encouraged when I meet older men that 60s, 70s, even 80s that are starting that journey that late in life of like, oh gosh, this has been an unhealthy pattern in my life, my whole life. And being able to face that is pretty courageous, because that's not easy to turn that around or to look at it and think about the possible damage that was done through years of relating to the world and to people we love in an unhealthy way. And so, anyway, this can happen for a lot of different reasons. Um, in my note here, we may have lacked a father who was intentional, or lacked a father all the way around, not even had a father. Um, and kind of giving us these lessons that grow us into the men that we're designed to be. And sometimes this is cultural. There's a lot of cultural things built into this. And so some of these books that I recommend here in this resource talk about uh, how the culture has trained men a certain way as well. Um, and one of the reasons why there are so many men in unhealthy situations showing up in an unhealthy way. Um, some of that is family origin things, some of that is cultural things, some of that is past traumatic events. And again, there's another side topic to this, and from the women's side as well, but we're going to focus primarily on men today because this is such a huge topic. And if this opens up doors or concerns or questions, or somebody wanting to go deeper into this, please let me know. Again, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I do think it affects everyone. This is going to affect spouses. This is going to affect co-workers. This is going to affect our sons and our daughters. This is going to affect everyone to a certain degree. And even for the women that might listen to this, you can maybe think back to how some unhealthy patterns and male figures in your life, fathers, affected you and brought, maybe in positive and health and negative ways. Like, it's good to think about this from both sides, because I know my wife has mentioned that a comment that her grandfather said to her as a kid still affects the way she looks at her body. And she's in her mid 30s, and so it's unhealthy men will hurt people, and the saying goes is true for men as well: hurt people hurt people. And a lot of these men have wounds. And so anyway, I think there's a lot here I want to kind of show. um, and I don't think there's time to give my whole story in this, but there'll be bits and pieces of it through here. But at some point, for those who want to hear more, I can definitely share more personal information, but I want this to be kind of a resource video and a resource page for those who might be coming into an awareness around a need of their own, or a need of a spouse, or a need of a son, uh, or just, I think another thing for the women who listen to this that's helpful is that your your sons will need these things, um, and they'll ideally need them to be given to them from fathers. Sometimes fathers aren't around, and so then there's some question marks of like, well, what do we do? Do I need to be the mom and dad to my son? How does that happen? And so I think some of those questions will be answered through some of these resources as well. So I wanted to kind of give little summaries of these books, because these are way too much to kind of like for me to try to summarize all of them. And I may go one by one and do like book reports on these, just to kind of give someone a tool. But nothing takes the place of kind of digging into some of these books, because you're immersing yourself in some of the topics here. And so uh, Wild at Heart, I would put at the top of the list here, is kind of a book that has started many men on the journey. When they read a book like Wild at Heart, and this is an older book, I think it's 30, maybe 40 years old, that John Eldredge wrote years ago, and it kind of it really started a fire in a good way for men to kind of wake up to this, how they've been maybe culturally trained to be tame, um, which has its benefits, men to be tamed, but also how it kills part of the soul when a man is tamed and is told to just be kind and nice and be your sweet little boy. And this is training that starts from when boys are really young. And boys are hard when they're little. They don't fit into the box. They don't fit into a school setting very well. They want to be wild. And so early on, we start to push boys into this tight little nice, kind, sweet package. And some of them will fight back against that, and some of them will just kind of embrace it, and that will be who they become. And that doesn't sound bad at first, but there are some very negative implications of that. And so Wild at Heart kind of exposes the issue here very well, and I think will help a lot of men take a look at their heart, and kind of it can release some shame around some inner struggles that they've always had but haven't been able to put their finger on. So Wild at Heart it can be a game changer for men, and awaken some things. These other books are all good too, and they can all do similar things, but Wild at Heart is a very unique book, um, and it can really start a journey for a lot of men, or has started a journey for a lot of men. Fathered by God is kind of his follow-up book to Wild at Heart, and this is a really interesting one as well. And this is good. This is good for men to read. This is good for mothers to read, because boys need to go through certain stages of development. Um, and John just does such a good job in this. He kind of puts it into these really cool stages, from, the beloved son stage, where they need to know that they're just delighted in and loved. And then they kind of typically go through kind of a cowboy phase where they're wild. And this is kind of the younger years in life. And as they get a little bit older, there becomes kind of a warrior phase, where most men in their late teenage years or early 20s will really want to fight for a cause, and they may join the peace treaty, or they may join the military, or there's something inside of them that starts coming to life, and they get passionate about something. And then there's a lover phase, where they start to see the beauty in life, and the beauty in the opposite sex. There's that comes to life, and then he kind of goes in from there of king, which is kind of a little bit later stage, when there's more authority and things that they kind of have under their domain, where they have a job or a business or a family, and kind of what that looks like. And then a sage would be the final stage of life, where they're passing on their wisdom and journey and knowledge to the next generation. But he talks about these stages, not that they go necessarily sequential, or one stops and the next one begins, but that they're kind of all there at any given point in even a little boy's life, but he's kind of walking through them kind of in order, if that goes, if things are allowed to go that way. And what I mean by that is, there are situations that disrupt some of that natural progression of a boy becoming a man. And that can be something like a dad leaving the family and saying, here you go, son, you're the man of the house now. And he's 8 or he's 10. He's not supposed to be in that role yet. And so he loses his childhood. He loses some of these early stages, and he's forced into a role that he's not supposed to be in yet. And it can disrupt and leave all kinds of deep wounding and pain and resentment and inadequacies and insecurities and frustrations. And so a lot of times these things are disrupted the normal order, but reading this is really beautiful and graceful, because if a man does miss some of those areas and he reads and goes, I never got to experience what that was like to be the beloved son, or to kind of have a cowboy phase of life where, he's got to run wild and build forts and do all the fun things that little boys like to do. I never got to have that. I had to grow up too fast or whatever. He can see these areas. And as the title of the book, kind of alludes to, God can father these areas and desires to father these areas. And, this man can be 40, 50 years old realizing this, but can still go back and have the Lord Father intentionally, specifically through the Lord and the Holy Spirit, but also through other men. And there's another big topic that we'll get into about how other men are critical to fathering boys and men, because men don't stop needing to be fathered as we get older. There still needs to be that going on, and that happens typically through healthy male relationships. But great read. Healing the Masculine Soul is a very unique book. Another old book. I stumbled onto this a few years ago as well, and it was an eye-opening book. And he really kind of helps men identify the wound, um, where it was, how it happened, what lies were sown into the mind, into the heart. And this is a very powerful book. But he talks about how basically, this cycle, if it's not broken, then the cycle will continue. The men that are hurt will hurt the next generation, their sons and daughters. Good chapters on um, dads and their sons, dads with their daughters. Really important, I think, topics for men to read about. And again, another book that if a woman reads a book like this, there will be deep insight into your husband or your sons, and kind of what drives them, what moves, how they think and see the world. Very powerful book. And a lot of healing, I think, even can be brought to women's health through reading a book like that, because it has so much deep insight, and there's a lot of father wounds to women. A lot of women live within those father wounds, and live out of those, because of the narrative that they may have brought on. He tells a story in that book about a dad who didn't know how to, when his daughter was old enough and started going through adolescence and changing, he started to disconnect from her when she needed him the most. But he says, I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know. He was, in essence, he was fearful of her beauty. Not that he would harm her or do something to her, but he just didn't know what to do with his daughter turning into a woman. And so he mentally and emotionally kind of separated from her in the most, important time of her life, to need a father to be there to delight in her and protect her and to encourage her. And so it talks about what she believed about herself because of that 20, 30, 40 years later, how that time in her life affected her as a grown woman, and how she viewed herself. And so there's some deep things in there that I think, again, not only healing for the masculine soul, but can be healing for the feminine soul as well. um, Hold on to your nuts. Sorry about the title here, but this is a really it's a pithy title. NUT stands for non-negotiable, unalterable terms. And Wayne, brilliant, and really kind of some funny parts in this book too. But he talks about men who don't know who they are in their core and their non-negotiables are, will live defensive. They'll live um, basically constantly seeking things outside of themselves, looking for validation from everyone, approval from other people. It just uh, Really powerful book, but he goes into helping men establish what are their non-negotiables, who are they, what are their core values, what are the things that they're not going to argue about. This is just who I am, um, and then which is great to define because when a man can define those non-negotiables, he can be flexible in everything else. And what you see in a lot of men, and I was in this category too, is that when you don't define these things well, then you're inflexible in everything else because you're seeking for some control, some power, some respect, some and everything can turn into an argument, and it just doesn't make sense. But that's what will naturally happen when a man doesn't know what his core is. And this happens to a lot of men, and there's multiple reasons here. And this kind of jumps ahead a little bit, but one core reason that happens to a lot of men is talked about extensively in this book, No More Christian Nice Guy, where he says basically when a man has gotten into a false view of life where it's just people pleasing and being nice, and showing up, basically being a chameleon, being what everybody else wants you to be, you don't know who you are because you've been trying to be what everybody else wants you to be your whole life. And women can fall into this too, but this gets really ugly when men fall into this because then they're seeking validation from everybody else, especially in a marriage relationship, this can be toxic and draining, and women will feel like they're having to be the mother of their husband and trying to like I feel like they're being his mommy, and they're if a woman feels like the man she's responsible for the man's emotions, he's probably in this category. And that's I've been in this state, and it's a very, very terrible place to be in, where you don't know who you are because you're too worried about making everybody else happy or pleased with you, as a man. And so that is a again incredibly toxic place to be. And it has the reason this is such a powerful book from a Christian perspective is that some of the ways that Jesus has been painted in Christian culture has been nice and meek, and he does a really good job of pulling out the real Jesus, like who the scripture says he is. And he was not nice by our cultural terms of nice. He was assertive, he was confrontational. He confronted things that were not right, that were harming people, harming people's souls. He flipped tables. He sat down and made a whip before he flipped the tables and chased people off. He called people names. I mean, like I love how he brings up this idea of like, yes, Jesus was the kindest human that ever lived, and yes, he was gentle and lowly and meek with certain times, but that didn't negate his wild side or his assertive, um, confrontational side either. And so a book that a lot of men need to read. I was one of them, and I've read this book a few times now because I somehow got this worldview for a long time that confrontation was wrong, and it was nice was the gospel, and nice was nice was the ultimate compliment. What a nice young boy! What a nice man! That word now is really kind of a word that kind of does something to my soul when I hear nice. I'm like, don't call me nice. It's so really, really good book, but kind of back up to your when a man doesn't know who he is because he's looking forward in other people or he's constantly seeking to please other people, how it will come out will be um, passive aggressive. It'll be frustrated all the time. It'll be anger at times when he's not keeping his nice face on all the time. And so and again, if you're a man in that situation, take those cues. Those are red flags that there's something down deeper brewing. And one of these books may be your starting place. And again, it may not be, everybody may not be wild at heart, jump off place, but it may be a good spot to start. Or maybe if you're really in a tough situation relationally with your marriage, you might want to jump into hold on to your nuts first, because this book will give you tools right away that will start to change the dynamic in your household. And I don't know if Wayne's a believer or what his faith is, but a lot of these principles are across the board just truth, um, and incredible. And literally, you could read through this book and start implementing these tools, and you'll see relationships start to shift almost immediately because there's patterns that we do that we don't even know we're doing, that if we stop them, if we just recognize they're happening and stop them, um, then it literally affects the whole household, how everybody else shows up. And so again, a topic that I say is super important, because a man's health in a family setting is massively important. It'll affect the whole tone of the house, as will, as will a woman's as well. But this is specifically geared towards men today. And so really good book. Hold on to your nuts, and don't let the title throw you off. It's not a comedy. It's a very, very powerful short read, and it gives men quick tools that they can jump into. Uh, the Warrior Poet Way and Tender Warrior. These are two books kind of written by two guys in totally different generations, but both were Army Rangers. Um, John Lavelle is a younger guy. Stu Weber's in his 80s, I think. He wrote Tender Warrior 40 years ago. The Warrior Poet Way is a newer book, but there's a lot of similarities, a lot of crossover here about how a healthy, integrated man has both sides here. Is a warrior, is able to be a warrior in whatever fashion that looks like. Mostly, it's probably going to be with the mind, with the soul, and the inside. But there's a time that a man needs to be a warrior physically and to be dangerous. And so both of them talk about that combination of being a warrior and also a tender or a poet, or a tender poet, and how those two things create an integrated man, and how a lot of times, men might be one way or the other. You might have a man who has zero kind of tenderness and kind of what John Lovell will call poet, inside of him, and he's kind of all hard-nosed and maybe brutish, and so then, can be harmful for a lot of people. And then you have also the other side of this, where there's no vigor, there's no life. You can be very sweet, nice, man, but there's really nothing that brings life to the table. And that's what I've had to revive. And so that's an area that again, our culture, depending on the culture you grow up in, you might be leaning one way or the other here. And so I grew up in a church culture that was all about sweet, nice boys. And so I've had to uproot and destroy and kind of tear down some of these false narratives and false views of what healthy masculinity looks like, and rebuild a healthier foundation. So those are two great reads. Um, I love both of those. I've already hit on No More Christian Nice Guy. Again, really, really good book. I Hear You is another really good book, kind of not specifically geared towards men here, but um, very important book for men. And I'll tell you why. It's a book on validation. And I think his name's Michael Sorensen, but men are doers, and when we see a problem, we want to fix it, for better, for worse. And any women that hears this is going to go, yeah, they're usually for worse, because we're always trying to fix things that they're not looking for a fix on. But when we offer solutions right off the bat, we leave people in our life feeling invalidated, um, unheard. And I did this for 10 years of my marriage, and I grieve this, because I realize how it leaves. I think I'm doing a good thing. I think I'm offering a solution to something, and yet the vast majority of the time I miss the foundational step of listening well and validating the emotion on the other side. Um, Not just parroting back, but actually listening for the emotion. Like, oh, are you frustrated about that? Is that anger you? If they don't straight up say it, they may say it, I'm infuriated, but sometimes someone may bring, especially a spouse, something about this in a relationship perspective right now this can go towards work. This can go towards children. This can go towards anything, but particularly relationally, in a marriage relationship or any type of relationship, um, there's there's a missing connection that happens every single time that we go to someone seeking validation, even though we don't know what we're looking for, but just someone to say, oh, I see, yeah, man, it's got to be hard, and we don't get it. There's something misses every single time. So think about a marriage relationship, how if every time your spouse comes to you, you're ready to fix a problem, but you never stop to pause and say, man, that sounds sad or scary or hard? Are you doing okay with that? Like, there's never the moment to really connect. That moment is missed. And then if we offer solutions right away, which I've done this and I have to pause and still catch myself from doing this because again, it's kind of a tendency. Um, then my wife feels unseen. And you talk about a lonely place to be when you're in a home with people you love and you want to be seen by, but you feel invisible to them. Um, and that's a difficult place to be. So if that's an area where you're like, yeah, I'm terrible at this. I try to give a solution to everything. It drives my wife crazy. Grab this book and every page there you will it will start to become second nature as you read a book like this to start listening for opportunities to validate, which is pretty much every conversation that you get into. And again, this is not just for men, although this is an incredible book for men because we're so quick to try to fix or offer a solution or just again try to figure something out. And again, that may not even be what someone is looking for in the situation. And again, it can leave people feeling very alone. So really powerful book, game changer for some men like myself. And then lastly here, The Way of the Superior Man. This I put a big caveat on here because this guy's kind of new age. There's some weird stuff about what he believes. Some of the chapters I'm just like, that was a weird chapter. But there's enough good stuff in here too where I say, hey, read it with discernment. But the masculine feminine polarities that he discusses in this book are very interesting and make a lot of sense. And so if there's a lot of spark that's been lost in a marriage and a relationship, there can be some really powerful um, tools, may not be the right word, but yeah, maybe just awareness again around like, oh, okay, I can see how I've been and this is one of my big ones from reading that book. I can see how my always deferring to my wife to where she wants to go eat was not healthy in the long run. For me, it was always like, oh, I'm being selfless. I'm giving her the preference. But what it does is it creates for the woman, it creates her to always have to make the decision, which is typically more of a masculine, trait or being in the masculine energy, which women can do that. There's no lack of ability to do that, but most women thrive when they're more in their feminine state, which requires you to be in your masculine state, which is more assertive. Even if you just and this is a big one for me, just give, hey, I'm thinking about taking this, I've narrowed it down to these two places and do you have preference? Or and you can always still, if they say, oh, I hate both of those and I'd rather go here, of course, that's still, but showing that masculine initiative frees the woman up. If she doesn't want to be in a decision making place at all, yeah, sounds great, then she can kind of flow with that. So there's some things in there that just really talk about how fast masculine and feminine energies create polarity in a good way. Or if both people are in feminine energy, it's kind of a negative polarity. It pushes people kind of away. It loses the spark. It might be more of like a good friendship, but you'll lose some of the spark. So there's some really interesting things in that book. But again, some caveats around some of his. He's definitely not different worldview than I am. But good resources. So just depend on where you are, men. Start somewhere. This isn't necessarily in order, but these are all really good books that might bring some insight. So good places to start. And then just a couple of little things before I wrap it up here, things to think about. And these are in those books too, but bring insight to your emotions. And so this is what we call, what the research calls emotional intelligence, which they call the new IQ is EQ, emotional quotient or emotional intelligence, which plays into everything. So the higher the EQ, the better relationships, the better people do at work, the better, everything is correlated more with emotional intelligence than it is IQ. And so, and that's something that can grow. And that starts with step one in emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And so most men, we avoid things. We avoid looking in, get things done. We kind of stay with the status quota, and this can be problematic. And so it can harm people and it can be unhealthy for us as well. So this will give you some tips in that area. I love this. This actually, Wayne Levine said this in the Hold On to Your Nuts book, but he said emotions plus insight equal feelings. And that's where a healthy man acts out of awareness of his feelings. An unhealthy man, like I was for many years, will react out of his emotions. And so that's when you're going to see a man who is quick to speak, defensive, kind of confrontational, maybe in an unhealthy way, maybe irritable, frustrated. And um, so this is being able to pause and be aware and start to be aware of our emotions helps us also tune in with others. And so when we're talking about validating and being better at validating people here, step one is being aware of our own emotions so that we can then tune into other people's emotions and kind of, again, it always starts on the inside. The work starts in and then overflows to the out, for better, for worse. So if we're unhealthy on the inside, we're going to have unhealthy overflow to those around us. And if we've gotten to a healthier place on the inside, then we're going to have healthier interactions with those around us. Um, for those like me who need to kind of awaken the inner warrior and awaken some of this more healthy assertiveness, do hard things, face fears. I talk about this all the time in our consults, but the two that I found the most helpful for me are cold exposure, because it's terrible every time. It's hard to get in every time, whether that's cold shower, cold plunge, whatever it is. And there's lots of ways that, but also breath holds is the other one. So both of those are uncomfortable. I hate the feeling of air hunger. And so doing some of these breath holds and breath work practices create another space that is very uncomfortable for me, but allows me to do something hard and then practice, kind of having that inner peace or stability in the midst of discomfort. And so again, this is kind of fighting back against the culture as well, because we live in a comfort culture. And so, I mean, some men maybe are doing, maybe they're challenging themselves with sports or with workouts, and this may not be an issue. But if you just kind of work and home, and you're never really kind of getting into some challenging things, um, we tend to grow soft. We tend towards comfort. We fear discomfort. We shy away from challenges or conflict, and we might grow passive as well. Passivity is opposite of masculinity. And so this is an area that is important to grow our masculine core in. And there's a lot of other ways to do that too. I just want to kind of give a couple options. And then lastly, before I wrap up here, I'm a little bit over our 30-minute, my 30-minute window I give myself, but men need to rub shoulders with initiated men consistently. And by initiated men, I mean men that will hold you to your commitments to be the man you're committed to be and aren't worried about hurting your feelings. This is not just buddies we hang out with. Now, our buddies can be initiated men, but a lot of times buddies are more like college buddies that we went drinking with or went out with. And that's those men aren't going to confront you usually in a healthy way. And those men are going to be too worried about, being your buddy versus helping you grow into who you say you want to become. And so this is a really big topic in Wayne Levine's book. And so he just highlights this, even I think he's a therapist, but even as a therapist, he's like, hey, men don't fit into therapy boxes a lot of times. So, if a woman's thinking like, if I could just get my man to a therapist, he could work through a lot of these things, and maybe, especially if he gets a good male therapist that can kind of be this for him. But if it's a female therapist, it may not be the best fit. He might help him identify things. I'm not, let me backtrack there, because I don't mean that. A woman can absolutely be a therapist to a man, but what a lot of men need will be to become aware of some of these areas that they are not healthy in, and then get deep in some of these relationships with men. And so again, a woman can encourage that process, but a woman can't be the man for them. So they can't be that. And so I kind of put a caveat down here that this is not in any way downplay or negate the importance of women in their husband's healing journey. It's just saying that, hey, it's not your responsibility to father him, or it's not your responsibility to kind of validate him, in the sense of like, he needs to find that deep inside through other men, and of course through his relationship with God. And you can be a catalyst in urging him that direction. But I've talked to a lot of women that have been super frustrated because they've tried to be this. They've pointed out all these, these things, and like tried to tell the man what they need to do. And a lot of times it distances them even more from their husbands, because men need to get this from other men. And so again, a really good chapter in Wayne's book about this. And this is, again, this is to free up women as well. It's not your responsibility to be his mama. And I think a lot of men, we wouldn't say that. And it's probably one of the most, hard things to one of the hardest pills to swallow, is to realize that we've been looking at our spouses for mothering, for, for things that they're not supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be doing our own inner work, and then overflowing with love and protection and provision and, leadership in a healthy way to those that are in our family and care. And so, men, if you're not with men, get with men. Get with men that are initiated. Get with men that are that you can look to and say, I see something in that man that is strong, yet kind, tender warrior, poet, warrior poet. I see something in that man that I want more of. And then find ways to get around those type of men more. So anyway, thanks for watching. The protocol that I've walked through here, I'll also kind of put into the member site, and send out. And so feel free, if you got a friend or a husband or a brother or a son that would benefit from some of these things, please share this. But thanks for watching, and hope everybody has a great weekend.